Hello and welcome to episode 57 of the Freo Big Footy podcast. This week we'll be going back over the win against Essendon, where Fremantle ended up being a pretty comfortable side after three quarters before Essendon got some junk goals in the last quarter. We'll have a quick look at the Peel game versus Subiaco and then the upcoming clash against the Bulldogs at Etihad Stadium, where obviously there's been quite a bit of talk about the game itself, not only the fact with the A-League Grand Final. Joining us is our usual resident Victorian expert, Seppo. How are you, mate?
I am good and can't wait for another week of footy, and it just feels really good to be 6-0 at the moment.
Absolutely. On last weekend, on Saturday night, Fremantle ended up being comfortable 12 goals 880 to 7 goals 1052. And at the end of the day, Fremantle put a pretty comprehensive display before slowing down a little bit in the last quarter there and allowing the Bombers to kick 4 goals. What were your thoughts on the game, Seppo?
Well, it was one that I managed to trek my way over to Western Australia and watch a game at Subiaco and enjoy the Saturday night spectacle. And it was just fun to be there and actually be a part of a game in the West rather than watch all the games interstate. And certainly Freo came out and dominated, even though Western did kick that first one. We certainly put on a bit of clinic in that first half and really dominated the game. And you can just see structurally what changed in that last quarter. And if you sat there and you just looked at the stats and saw the score worm, you'd be feeling a bit worried. But when you're there at the ground and you can see what's happening, it's a different aspect. When you've got the eye for the game and even just the matchups around the ground, you can see what they're trying to do. And I'm glad the players actually are not just switching off, it's just more structurally in positions that the coaches are doing to that's affecting the results that we're seeing.
Yeah, it was one of those strange games that we talked a bit after the game, Seppo, that it was probably one of the more quieter Fremantle Essendon games. Normally they're quite sort of high octane and there's always quite a bit of atmosphere, but it did seem a little bit subdued on the night, and I think that was mainly because sort of Freo managed to sort of put the foot down, after probably Essendon were pretty good for the first 7 or 8 minutes of the game, but then Fremantle sort of dominated for the next couple of quarters after that. It's a bit of an interesting thing, Seb. I was very surprised that the WADA appeal didn't come out before our game. We always seem to get teams that have some curveball before the game to give them a bit more of an extra boost, so I was a bit surprised that they didn't bring it in before our game, to be honest. But overall, once again, a pretty dominant display by the midfield, and our defence held quite strong with young Alex Pearce showing a bit down back there, Seppo, in his first game.
Yeah, it was good to see him come in, and I think it took a while for him to get his first touch. And I remember there was one passage of play, I can't remember if it was before he had his first touch, it might have been in the second quarter, where Ibbotson marked the ball deep and he went to turn right to pass it off to Alex Pearce, but he hesitated, even though Alex Pearce was in the clear. Ibbotson just had that little bit of hesitation to put the new player under pressure, and he changed the direction of play and went back the other way to the experienced Johnson. It was interesting just to see how players were sort of a bit trepid with how they went with Alex Pearce, but he certainly, by the end of the game, he was just flying into packs and putting in some good marks, and he just seemed like a natural down there. And you can see why Ross was so keen to get games into him, and glad to see that we could really step it up without McFarlane out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you said, a couple of use of his body, particularly in the I think there was a good mark on the last quarter, where he had Danaher one-on-one and he sort of backed his judgment, and he showed some real ability there, which was really pleasing. The other interesting thing was probably, even though when they were talking, or Ross was talking about having the queue in the rack, it was interesting that they brought De Boer on so late. When you felt that Fremantle were pretty comfortable at 54 points, you would have thought they would have given De Boer a bit more time, but obviously it was a sort of a late decision, and he certainly didn't get a lot of time there. So it's interesting to see how Fremantle use the sub going forward, because De Boer has obviously had 4 out of 6 turns in the green jacket. So it'll be interesting to see whether they keep him or let him have a full run at Peel, because obviously his match conditioning is not going to be great if he keeps just playing only 10 or 15 minutes a week.
Yeah, he only got 14% game time from that late sub in the game, so you'd think he'd really benefit from a full run in the reserve, especially when you consider I think Peel have to bye the week after, so I think there was some state games on, so it really makes it hard that if you don't get picked or you're as a sub again, then you get dropped the following week, it's going to be very hard. So I think they're probably going to have to make some hard decisions this week, but it was good to see that they kept Tabner on, and he really didn't get subbed off for a poor performance, because he is sort of still involved and helped us really in the structure in the forward line. But the fact that we can take him off and give Matt De Boer a run was good to see.
Yeah, it would have been nice to see Taberner. I mean, obviously, as you said, his leading's quite good and up the ground, and it probably was a bit dewy and that sort of thing. So he actually got his hand on the ball a few times inside 50, but just didn't manage to clunk him. And we probably just need him to be that, as you said, like we certainly look better with him in the side, but as you said, just be good to see him take a couple of marks. As you said, Fremantle sort of did dominate quite a bit, but once again, we did see a little bit of butchering of the ball going forward at times, particularly in that second and third quarter, where we just seem to get on top and we just get a little bit lazy. Or, I know Sonny Walters kicked, one straight over Pav's head, and I know Lee Spur had a couple of sort of turnovers that weren't really terrific. But, I mean, it was good to see him bounce back with 29 disposals. So, considering he doesn't get it all that often, the fact that he had 29 touches was a positive. And obviously you could see without McFarlane, they used Spur a little bit more when Pearce wasn't getting as much of the ball as maybe McFarlane would in a normal game.
Yeah, I think, and even just how well midfield dominated all game, I think it could be summed up by one passage of play where Sandy dished it out, and I was actually sitting next to my sister watching the game, and you could see Fife lurking at the back of the pack, and I said, watch Sandy feed it down to Fife and him stream forward, and it was just seconds before Sandy just reached up, put it behind him, Fife was on the outside, there was no one on him, and I thought that was quite a strange decision by the Bombers to not actually put someone really on Fife. I know they probably had Heppel on him for a bit, but the fact that Fife ran free out of the midfield so much was just a real perfect ball from Sandlands onto him, and he just streamed forward and put it on the tit of Pav, and Pav slotted the goal. And it was just something perfect. We've been doing a lot, dominating the centre clearances, and it really fell away in the last quarter when not one of like Sandy, Mundy and Fife really all jumped in the middle together, and you're just pulling people off and resting Fife on the forward line. And it certainly changed our centre breakup. So I can just show you how quickly our dominance can change if we start to, not necessarily, it just sort of gives a bit of an insight into what it could be if we start to lose one of, those three guys in the midfield for any long period of time.
Yeah, I think they were definitely sort of trying different rotations out in that last quarter, and it was interesting to watch David King on 360 this week, and he was sort of showing some footage with, Fremantle in the first quarter, obviously hunting in the packs, and then in the last quarter where you saw a couple of guys just walking like Fife was just cruising around. And so, yeah, it'd be interesting to see when, as you said, whether we put it together. There was also probably a little bit of an interesting point on the forums this week. Apologies because I can't remember who put it up, but even with Taberner, like the scoring that we're doing with Taberner on the ground for the full game as opposed to when he becomes a sub. So it's interesting. We seem to run those games out a bit better when Taberner does play the full game. So it'd be interesting this week to see if Taberner A gets a full game and B, what impact that does have on the ground, especially being at Etihad as well, which is a little bit smaller, obviously, than Subiaco.
And it's quite interesting, even just with how our forward structure is, because everyone presumed at the start of the year that Sandlands is going to be doing a lot of resting forward and becoming that ruckman that goes in there. But I've actually checked out his heat maps and the position he's been racking up his disposals and where he's moving. He's actually playing a lot more behind the ball and taking that sort of defensive mark rather than being that forward target, because we've got enough tools and Pavlich staying really deep and Main and Taberner to complement it, and then get Clark rolling up into the forward line. It's a lot better, it seems, and we'll try to push Sandlands in there. And it's just great to see that, you take Taberner out of it and we can sort of still perform, but obviously a lot better when he's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also like part of the, as you said, trying to get that sort of, obviously he's our bailout option down in defence, but obviously it was good to see Clark taking a few more marks as well in that sort of forward, between the wing and forward 50, and I think he was the equal highest mark taker on the ground, so that's obviously a positive sign. And obviously the Bombers were trying to sort of work hard to stop guys like Duffield getting the ball, and obviously Duff had a pretty quiet game when you look at the stats, and they were trying to work pretty hard because obviously Duffield does have that ability to use the ball very effectively, so you can just see they were sort of trying to keep him out of the play as much as possible, and obviously trying to let Spur and those sort of guys bring the ball out. So it was, as I said, overall, I think you can't complain about the performance. And, at the start of the day, you'd certainly take the result as it stood. But, as I said, a lot of their guys who were getting the ball, like Goddard and that sort of thing, were getting it more across half-back and weren't really as damaging as they could have been when they were sort of getting it more forward of 50 or forward of centre.
I suppose the only downside we've had to the game is really Walters is a bit out of form, and he thought, nice performance with Ballantyne back up and running and Walters out there. It seems that he's operating at 43% efficiency, and that's just unlike Walters with his kicking, and he only hit the scoreboard once, and he's sort of a bit down on what we expected from him. So I suppose there's a lot of upside to that, once he comes good, and we'll back him in again, but maybe players like Duffield and Subin, as they start to drop off on their early season great form, that they'll certainly be replaced on the way when guys like Sheridan and Gray and all those guys come through and start to put in big WAFL performances.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's interesting, as talking about with Walters, and obviously there's been a bit of discussion, and obviously taking aside the fact that he probably ducks a little bit too often trying to get those kicks, I think it's a bit interesting the way that they've set up a bit this year, Seppo, where last year obviously there was a talk about we would have Pavlich and Walters and Ballantyne deep in the forward 50, where this year they seemed, and Main was the one pushing up near the wing, where this year they pushed Main back towards goals, and he's obviously putting that defensive pressure, but Walters is spending a lot more time outside that forward 50, and obviously even though he's probably not, he hasn't probably been as effective as they probably would have liked, but he's probably just getting used to that new role as well, where he's, sometimes he's probably just trying to do a little bit too much rather than taking the easy options. So it'll be interesting to see if they persevere with that, because he seems to be spending a lot more time between the 50s than he was last year, where he's spending the majority of the time inside 50.
He's almost sort of treading on the Hill and Pearce territory, as those wingers that sort of run up and link up players where streaming through the midfield, and both Hill and Pearce have just been absolutely fantastic. That's Daniel Pearce, not Clancy, who's been doing a better job even further back. And just moving on to Clancy, I thought his game was probably one of the best, and I know he's had good games in the past against Essendon, but the way he threw his weight around, especially in the air, for someone so short and stocky, he competes really well in the air and puts some big crashes and bashes into the Bombers players. And the way he's just been sweeping up and playing, like you mentioned in, I think, last week's podcast, what he's doing as we're switching the ball around, or even just looking for that drive when the ball's kicked into the midfield, is fantastic. And I actually put him in our top 3 votes. And I know a lot of people probably saying Brownlow vote's probably going to go to Neil and Fife and Pav, but I think there's every chance that Clancy Pearce, I'm not sure if it got noticed by the umpires enough, but his 26 disposals, I think a lot of them were quite crucial, and he certainly's been really helping us with 4 rebound 50s. Is good drive from the back line this year, especially with probably Johnson and Duffield and Ibbotson not really stepping up in those sort of key stats and areas.
Yeah, just going back to, I agree with what you're saying there, Seppo, absolutely. And as you said, I think Clancy's certainly entrenched himself in that best 22 at the moment. Just going back to that previous point where you're saying about with obviously Hill and Daniel Pearce up there, I think Walters just gives us that little bit extra run when we, like, if one of those guys is off or rotated through the midfield, I think Walters is just giving us that little bit more speed. Obviously our other guys are quite tall, but they're not genuine pace. And it'll be interesting to see this week if the ball does go back, whether they bring Sheridan in. If Sheridan does play, and certainly plays a little bit more, it'll be interesting to see if they then push if that sort of pushes Walters back down inside 50 a little bit more. And then obviously because Sheridan can then relieve either Pearce or Hill on that wing if they need that extra outside run.
Definitely.
All right, any other points you want to bring up this week, mate, on this game?
No, other than the fact that it's always good to get another home win, and that margin is probably exactly as what I predicted. I said about 30 points on last week's podcast, and it's just good to get that result and not let it slip away in that last quarter.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it'll be interesting to see this, this week whether Fremantle obviously will be able to maintain that pressure, because obviously with the Bulldogs game coming up and Etihad, where Fremantle generally do play pretty well, apart from when they play St Kilda, it'll be interesting to see if they can maintain that sort of pressure, because obviously St Kilda showed last week in that second half, and we'll get to it in a sec, that they're certainly the Bulldogs are vulnerable in certain places across the field.
And how good was it to come out of another game and not actually have a major injury to worry about? It's been quite luckily, when you consider all the other major injuries that's happening, that we completed 108 interchanges, and I'm sure they were a quite slow rate right through the whole game, and we could be a bit more relaxed and not make any forced changes. And this week is another one where the selection dilemmas are right in, because there's no one really hurting themselves too much, and we've been quite lucky with our fitness and availability this year.
Yeah, I mean, let's touch wood on that comment. I suppose one other thing is that it's interesting to see that in the sort of disposal efficiency in the AFL, Lachie Neale's rated the number 1 player at the moment, Seppo, for players over, I think it's 300 disposals, and at the moment running at 86.5%, which when you consider he's actually playing in and under, that's a phenomenal effort. And
especially when you consider his kick to handball ratio is probably right up there, where someone like Pritis is very handball happy. I think Lachie Neale loves to kick the ball now, and I know he operated at 63% in this game, but you go the week before against Melbourne, and he was 24 out of 25 kicks. I think it was 96 or 98% efficiency. So he's very good at what he does, and it's not just cheap handballs getting that disposal efficiency up. He racks them up, and he uses the ball very well.
Yeah, the other interesting thing, just on that sort of, when you mentioned, Seppo, about the rotations last year, if you look at sort of in the game, every game Fremantle used just about all their rotations. They were running at about 119, and even in the first half, we always ran around about between 59 and 63 interchanges. Where this year, for some reason, and it's not like we've had injuries or anything, but Fremantle run at about 59 to 63 again in the first half, but we seem to be running 10 to 14 interchanges short compared to what we have in the past. So it's quite interesting to see, whether that shows up later in the year or whether they're just putting a bit more work into them now, but it just hasn't been the same as what it was last year, and their ability to use the whole interchange. So it's quite interesting to see what will happen when they do that more later on in the season.
I think that where that's gone is the shift in numbers. Instead of running to the bench, we're resting players in the forward line and trying to open up the field and actually keep more stay-at-home forwards, or even Fife comes right out of the contest. I've noticed how deep, when he was resting forward, he was actually sitting right inside our forward 50 when the ball's sort of sitting our defensive 50, that they wouldn't sort of all press up the ground. They're actually trying to stretch the field open, and I suppose that's one thing where those interchanges are missing, that we're giving the player opportunity to rest being on the field where they can still be damaging rather than constantly having them turn over. And maybe it's just trying to get our players and the game plan used to, and the inevitability that the interchanges might drop off from being 120 down to some ridiculous number next year.
Yeah, well, that's it. At the moment, just having a look through, we've sort of the highest has been 111, but we've been 105, 99. The only last one that we got really close to the top was when we played the Eagles in the Derby. So obviously that was a bit hotter that day. But generally we've been running, particularly the last 3 weeks, at least 10 to 14 interchanges below our full rotations, which is quite interesting. So it'll be interesting to see what they do this week at Etihad. So obviously during the week, on the weekend as well, Peel had their game at Saturday on the 9th of May against Subiaco, and were pretty comprehensively beaten by the Premiers, 16 goals, 16, 112 to 7, 10, 52. Obviously, Griffin and Blakely both didn't play in this game and were held over as emergencies, which was quite interesting to see. That obviously we'll get to this in a minute, Seppo, but neither of those actually made the extended bench this week. So, but once again, Tendai Mzungu got 28 possessions and got reported, but got off with a $50 parking fine. Not even a carton really these days for those guys. But good to see Lachie Weller once again getting a lot of touches, with 27 touches and 3 inside 50s as well.
I suppose when you look at that, Lachie Weller's probably been one of the more consistent younger players. I think Brady Gray and probably Ballard's probably been named in the best a couple of times for Peel, but Lachie Weller seemed to be just a bit more consistent in terms of what he's doing than Blakely, and I suppose Blakely missing out doesn't help, but certainly it's good to see those younger guys really putting on good games and just keep on putting pressure on the senior guys through Peel.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sheridan once again got 22, but it was good to see good signs with Tanner Smith getting in the best players as well for Fremantle, even though he only had the 8 touches. So it was pleasing for him to get out there and put in a good performance.
And not even be able to check the game out myself, but I heard Vanderloo has actually been tested up forward, and it's interesting to see that they might think we've got enough good stocks with Alex Pearce and Tanner Smith down back that we think we may just need one extra, or just trying to add another string to him, bows, and get him up forward.
Yeah, I suppose the other important, thing out of this game, Seppo, was it was the senior debut for Sean Hurley as well. Made his first appearance, and by all accounts didn't get a lot of it, but he looked to create space and seemed to play all right from the sort of feedback I got from people who were at the game.
And it's good to see he's probably under the guidance of guys like Tanner Smith and the other senior defenders there that can and lead him on and just show him, playing in a game at a higher level rather than playing by himself. Not many other Freo players down with the reserves, that he's up there playing with the guys and just getting a feel for what it's like with those other boys and get some chemistry happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so we'll see if those young guys, as you said, like the likes of Langdon and DeLuca and Duffy and Hughes and those sort of guys can continue their performances and keep pushing hard, obviously, and we'll go from there. Obviously, would have been interesting, the build-up for this game, I think, would have been a lot stronger this week, Seppo, obviously, if we didn't have the Bulldogs fading out in the second half last week. But once again, it'll be one of those danger games for Fremantle, and obviously Western Bulldogs are getting some experience back with Matthew Boyd, Mitch Wallace, Ling Jong and Bailey Dale coming into the side, and unfortunately, in a bit of tragic news for the Bulldogs, Clay Smith going out for his knee reconstruction for the third time. And obviously, being a Fremantle supporter with the likes that we saw with obviously Morabito over the years, it's just really a shame to see those sort of young kids getting those sort of injuries. And for Fremantle, Luke McFarlane, Tommy Sheridan and Hayden Crozier coming into the squad of 25. And this, to me, probably looks like, I reckon, probably arguably our best 25 Seppo, probably maybe with the exception of Dawson, who could potentially come back in as a defender. But I think Sheridan and Crozier are our next best players who are in the list.
It's funny that you think that this side still has Mzungu, Dawson, I suppose even you include him, Crowley, all out of the side, and it'd just be lovely to fit more than 27 or 28 into 22, but it just doesn't happen. So it's going to be some tough decisions made on game day, and I think it probably might end up being that Alex Pearce misses out to make way for Luke McFarlane. You think he might stay at home for Peel. I'm not sure if they'll probably want to bring him along. He's had his taste of first AFL game and they can let him go back, but you think maybe one or two of Tommy Sheridan, maybe he can make the final side. I'm not sure if Crozier or the person that comes out for Sheridan might travel. It'd be interesting if they travel with two, because it does seem to be the more popular choice, but I suppose it's a downside if they do travel, that they're missing out on the chance to make their way back in, that Blakely and Griffin done last week, that if they're not playing for Peel, it's hard to put their hand up and really warrant a side over Freo players that have just been performing every week. So I'd probably, the norm would be one change, McFarlane for Alex Pearce, but I think I just have a strong feeling the way that Ross has been talking about Sheridan, and he's a very good player, and I can quite easily see him coming into the back line. And just looking at the stats from last week, you could think that maybe Duffield or De Boer, from having to be the sub so much, might just make way for Sheridan. And I'd prefer Sheridan over Crozier in this game anyway, just to really help Al move the ball through the midfield.
Yeah, just going back to my original point, I did forget Mzungu down there. So Mzungu would obviously be that other player who's probably looking in that top 25. But it will be interesting because the Bulldogs don't have a lot of height down there. So I don't know if it'll be, because obviously I think Johnson will be capable of playing on Boyd. So it will be one of those games that's interesting to see whether they do go with McFarlane. Obviously the week after we play North, who do tend to have like a lot bigger forwards when you've got Jared Waite and Petrie and that sort of thing. So it'd be interesting to see whether they do risk him, because there's not really obviously if they put McFarlane on Boyd, which they could do, that'll obviously allow Johnson to roam and play that third man, because if you look at the other players they've got in that forward line, they don't have a lot of height realistically when you're looking at Cramery, which obviously would be a good matchup for someone like Ibbotson, but Honeychurch, Wallace and Dowhouse, there's no real massive talls in there. So it'll be interesting to see where, and even on their bench, I don't think there's anyone like, you think McRae will play, Horvat, Hunter, those sort of guys. There's not a lot of height down there. So it'd be interesting to see whether they risk McFarlane or they're going to give Pearce another week there and maybe see how Pearce goes on Boyd to start with, and then maybe let Johnson play that loose man and then see how it goes from there.
I think we'll find out probably tomorrow afternoon after the last session when they get to the airport, if McFarlane's on the plane, they think they'll play. They won't send him all the way across not to play. So you'd think if he's on there, it'd probably be Pearce missing out. But there's every opportunity. I think we discussed this before, that we might even have a combination of McFarlane and Pearce. If Johnson's a bit proppy, we can afford to probably play based on those matchups with McFarlane and Pearce and give Johnson a rest to come back strong, and drop out Pearce the following week to play the North Melbourne. So it's a quite interesting prospect, and I'd be happy with either way you cut and dice, and obviously for the structure they'll decide, the coaches, whatever the best matchups are. But it's good to see that you're not worried about any sort of spud getting a game, and they're just quality. Even Crozier for Walters might even be an upgrade on form in terms of how Hayden might consider himself performing, and if Walters is down, it might be a chance for him to, it's pretty harsh to say that Walters has got to go back to the WAFL, because it's been a while since he's been banished, and turn it around. But if there's a chance for him to just have a rest, get his body right, get his head back into shape, and I don't know if it's the effects of that concussion still, that Walters had a down game. But if Crozier came in, I'm sure not many arguments would be on the board for what Hayden can provide.
Yeah, I said it'd be just interesting to see what the coaching staff want out of Walters. I think that's an important thing. So it'd be just interesting to see how he plays and where he plays majority of his footy this week. As as we saw on Friday night, or on the Saturday night game, where they were interviewing Lyon, and he had his little whiteboard up, and I think his last one was "Don't lose your seat." And I don't think anyone would particularly want to be losing their seat on the bus, so to speak. So I'd be very surprised if they sort of make the. And as I said, I don't think they'll make major changes, but as you said, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they maybe do look at giving the Boar an extra week in the WAFL, and maybe bring Sheridan back in for the run. And also Sheridan has shown that he can play down back a little bit, so he does give a bit more versatility to that back line, particularly because they have a number of smalls that can play down there. And I suppose the other side they've got to look at Seppo, is really a lot of the Bulldogs' drive this year has come from the two half-backs in Robert Murphy and Jason Johannesson. So they may look at De Boer and Main as being those sort of two negating type half-forwards that will try and stop that run, because the Saints showed last week if you can get those sort of guys not running and being as effective as they have been, then obviously it does take away a bit of that Bulldog run through their middle.
Yeah, I suppose if you look back beyond the miraculous comeback from the Saints, if you go back to Bulldogs' great win against Sydney, how influential Robert Murphy was probably where Freo will decide if he's going to be their best decision maker and kick of the footy. If you can shut him and Hannison down, that's probably going halfway to beating the Bulldogs there, because I know Bontempelli's a great player and there's other players that will pop up, and Stringer's always a gun. He's doing quite well, but maybe if we run Bontempelli and Fife head-to-head around the ground, let them sort themselves out, that you can put a good hard tag. Maybe Clancy Pearce might even push forward and get a job on Murphy or something like that, just to apply a bit of pressure, and maybe even get Subin up on him and get in his face and deny some space. It will certainly limit how the fact that the Western Bulldogs have been distributing their ball from the back line. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see as well, obviously, who they play on Stringer. So obviously you got Stringer and Kramery, who are both quite, sort of mobile forwards, and obviously Ibbotson and Sutcliffe and Spur would be the three choices you've got there. So it'd be interesting to see which way Ross Lyon uses those matchups down there. The other interesting thing will be probably Seppo in this game is who they put Liam Pickett on, and whether they go with Fife and Bontempelli head-to-head.
That's probably the way you look at it, and I think even this year, I haven't watched too many Bulldogs games or full sessions of it, but I think Liam Pickett is probably previously renowned like Crowley as a good tagger, but he's probably dropped a bit off, and I think starting to get a lot more ball this year. So he's not playing that really hard tag and starting to play that soft tag, almost like our own Clancy Pearce is playing this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it'd be interesting to see if they, and as I said, like Bontempelli and Fife would be a very entertaining matchup to watch, because obviously both got good height. Obviously Fife would have a bit more strength there, but it'll be interesting to see which way they decide to go, and whether they, as you said, use Liam Pickett on someone like Lachie Neale, or whether they go with Ling Jong and Lachie Neale head-to-head, something like that, which obviously Lynn probably got a little bit more pace off the, across the ground, but obviously Lachie's got that ability in close to certainly hurt the Bulldogs with his disposal and breaking that ball out of clearances.
It's one thing I've probably never noticed, just because he's so small and evasive. I've never seen Lachie Neale actually cop a lot of an attention and a tag, and he just seems to make his way into the stoppages and make his way out just underneath Sandland's feet, and really hard to probably lay a tag on someone like that. And even just talking about these clearances, and I just can't wait to see how well Sandilands and Clark dominate against Ace Cordy, because he's only really a youngish ruckman that's probably, you know, when we've faced the Bulldogs in the past, they've had Minson or someone out there that's, you know, tested at least Sandlands and Clark, but I think we can well dominate the hit-outs and centre clearances if the old 211 and Zackers get a lot of that first use, because I think the Bulldogs, and I think even a couple of the guys on the forum, have conceded defeat out of the midfield, thinking that they might bring Minson back in for this game, but there must be something wrong with him. I'm not sure if he's injured at the moment or playing in the Magoos, but
yeah, no, he's in the Magoos.
Yeah, so it's going to be certainly fun for our midfield today, on Sunday.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and I think that pretty much stamps. You'd have to think if Minson's not getting a game in this game, his papers are pretty much stamped. So it'd be interesting to see if the team whether they try to trade him out at the end of the year, or obviously they see Ace Cordy as their future, and it's great to see him getting games. But as you said, he should be. It'll certainly be a tough game for him this week, playing up against both Sandilands and Clark. So
I think Roughhead's probably their secondary that will probably go in there. I'm not sure if Talia jumps in the ruck at all, or if they'll get Tom Boyd in there, but it'll be interesting just to see how they go against Sandilands and Clark, because certainly around the ground and in that centre square, it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they have a good pace, and obviously like some of their better clearance players like Liberatore unfortunately did his knee at the start of the year, so they're relying on that quick ball movement and running power that they have. So it will certainly be a tough day for Fremantle, sort of with their transition D, but obviously at the same time it'll interesting to see how the Bulldogs structure, because they obviously know that Sandilands is going to win probably 90% of the hit-outs, and we can dictate where that ball goes. So it'll be interesting to see how the Bulldogs adjust to it, and how Lyon takes advantage of that as well, to whether he splits it up or moves it away from one of their key inside sort of clearance players to take advantage of, particularly when we've got our best three in there, when we've got Lachie Neale, Mundy and Fife in the middle.
Certainly. Now, there's one player on the Bulldog side, just taking a look at the list, that does worry me, and it's one thing I always look to just to see who the opposition's best small forward is, because they always seem to trouble us, and I can guarantee you that Dalhouse will end up kicking a goal on Sunday. It always seems to be someone like him, or Eddie Betts or Garland, or someone will get under Spurries or Sutcliffe's skin and manage to sneak one out, and that's probably our sort of only weakness we've probably seen over the past couple of years. And he's a very good player, Dalhouse, and it's harder to recognise him without his big long dreads now, and he's certainly quick off the mark and may cause us a bit of problems if they manage to get it out of the midfield and down their end.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and last year I think, as you said, like some of those smaller forwards do tend to cause us a few more problems, though. I think he only kicked one goal last year by memory, but I'm pretty sure one thing we may improve on this year, Seppo, is that we should get more than 4 free kicks for the game.
Oh, that's right. Last year was that record-breaking free kick differential, which certainly this year it's probably only one game that I've really complained about the umpiring, and I don't know who the umpires we've got for this round, but certainly they've been quite good, and it's just the interpretation of the rules and everything. There was only, I think, that Melbourne game that was quite frustrating, with a lot of the calls just not going our way, or they're pulling out the 50-50 ones to Melbourne for something a bit soft. But I like the way games in general have been umpired this year, and I think there's probably only one that's been a bit odd and weird, and it certainly hasn't affected the result too much. But it's definitely not much complaining from most of the punters this year compared to last year, so can't argue too much.
Yeah, no, it was a bit of a, as you said, I thought the Bagley one last week was a bit of a shocker with the deliberate there where Pav kicked the goal. But as you said, on the whole, I think the umpiring has been pretty good, and I think Fremantle have also managed to adapt a little bit better to that sort of holding the ball. We don't seem to have anywhere near as many like we either seem to get the clearance or get our hands to the ball and get the ball out, or it becomes a ball up. So we seem
And
to
even something I reckon that Fife, I think it's been picked up that I reckon Fife's allowed a bit of leniency with how long he gets to dispose of the ball, and he might pick the ball up, have two or three people on him, and manage to break free where other players probably be called for, had prior opportunity, but they seem to give Fife, I don't know if he bends time or whatever he does, he just managed to get that extra little second to the umpires can sort of see he's breaking free, going, no, hold on, you haven't really limited and stopped him. He's off, and that's his. You've got a prior opportunity to tackle Fife. If not, he's away.
Yeah, I mean every league in the world has superstars get the calls, and we don't have too many, and so I'm more than happy for him to be able to get a little leniency, because we certainly haven't had too many over the time. And
this is a square up for 19 other years of terrible calls going our way, I think.
well, we certainly don't even. Even last week where they were all draping over Sandlands inside 50, and I don't think he's ever got a free kick in, or very rarely gets an inside 50 free kick. So, but is there any other matchups that sort of stand out to you, Seppo, in this one?
Probably not, other than the fact that you don't think we'd go in with both McFarlane, Johnson and Pearce, and it might work for a side like North Melbourne that has Waite and Petrie and Ben Brown or something like that, but certainly not for the Bulldogs. Probably considered a shorter forward line setup, and when they've got guys like Cramery and Tom Boyd that are more sort of main and smaller sides, but I think we'll match up quite well, and I think our midfield, without Liberatore in them for them, I think our midfield would dominate again.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think like I said, it'll be interesting to see. If it was me personally, I wouldn't play McFarlane. I think he just if there's any doubt at all, just give him an extra week. And as you said, I'd be interested to see if they could play if Pearce could start on Boyd and let Johnson be that third man across to sort of be that intercept marking player. But as you said, either way they go, I think, as you said, I think Fremantle will be able to put enough pressure on in that midfield to make it difficult for the Bulldogs to get clean ball inside 50. But at the same time, last week Essendon showed, they sort of chipped the ball around and were sort of very slow bringing the ball out, where the Bulldogs will certainly be a lot more aggressive in their running. But it'll be interesting to see if their running and the pressure, whether Fremantle are able to lock them in and sort of get that manic tackling going, where they sort of tend to make them turn the ball over. So, and obviously Ross Lyon would have watched the game last week against the Saints and picked out what St Kilda were able to do there with to sort of bring them undone in that second half, where they sort of, as you said, unfortunately went to a crawl after that big game against Sydney the week before.
It's interesting if the Bulldogs come out with a game plan of quick ball use and fast speed to break us down, and if they burn the ball and we hurt them the other way, and if they've expended a lot of energy into a quick game plan and they slow down like they did against the Saints, I think it can hurt them the other way when we have controlled it quite well and we can put on a big margin. But you think if that happens, once again, you'll see us probably get to that comfortable margin and then just take the foot off in the last. If Bulldogs come out firing and they hit the Freo wall and we go back the other way, I think we can see the writing on the wall what's going to happen again. So let's just hope that Bulldogs keep us on our toes all game. We can actually have a nice 4-quarter competitive game right the way through.
Yeah, and I mean you have to like what the Bulldogs have shown this year. They're certainly showing a little bit more attacking flair under Beveridge, and they're sort of they've probably done what Carlton haven't done. Like Carlton last year were playing 2 and 3 negative taggers in their midfield, and I think Brendan McCartney was doing the same, where they used to have Mitch Wallace, Liam Picken, and those couple of guys were playing all quite negative football, where this year they've sort of let them open it up a little bit more, and they're certainly paying dividends for them. But it'll be interesting to see, obviously, this week. I mean, they certainly, Ross Lyon, as I said, will be watching what they did the first 5.5 weeks of the season as well, not just the second half last week. So, anytime you beat Sydney on Sydney, you've got to respect respect what they've done, and especially in the wet as well, which was bread and butter for Sydney and what they love to do. So it certainly won't be any easy game for us out there, and it'll certainly test us with a different sort of game style than what we had last week.
And I just wonder, I haven't really checked the forecast if it's going to be nice weather, but you think being a day game, unless it's Yeah, it's going to be 19 and sunny at Etihad Stadium. If it'll be roof open or roof half closed or roof closed, it'll be interesting to see what they do with the roof on Sunday.
Yeah, ideally you'd want the roof. I mean, obviously, watching it on TV, having the roof open's a pain in the butt because it just.
Well, the shadows are cast when the sun starts.
Yeah, and the TV goes in and out, and it's just.
You think a winter, low sun, midday, as the game goes on, it's going to look pretty bad, but. There's nothing worse than trying to track the ball when it's coming in and out of the shadows at Etihad, be it on the TV or even at the ground. So maybe there's a little chance of rain and they can just force the roof closed. But yeah, certainly I'll be there either way and supporting our team on behind the goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there any sort of post or pre-game things this week, Seppo, for those people coming on?
No, it's a pretty normal fly-in performance and fly-out for the mob this week. So.
Yeah.
Nothing interesting, but I do hope that Sheridan can make the final side, and I can get out there with our little Tommy Sheridan banner behind the goals, and yeah, hopefully he can make his way into the side. Because when you think about it, McFarlane and Sheridan were two players that have been forced out of the side due to injury, not due to performance, and they've sort of both been named to make their way back in. But obviously, Sheridan needs to probably get through the final session and have someone be dropped for him to make it back into that 22, but I'd certainly love to see him out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as I said, I'm sure whichever 22 go out there will certainly be giving it all because, as you said, they know that there's plenty of guys sort of biting on their heels to get a game, so they just can't afford to, you know, not follow the coach's instructions to the letter because obviously they want to keep their spot and their bus on the seat, so to speak,
yeah.
or their seat on the bus, so to speak. So, so what's your prediction for this one, Seppo?
Oh, I'm going to go with the average of 30 points again. It seems to be working quite well. I reckon our margin, 90 to 60. I think that's our average for and against results this year. So I'm going to run with that. Yeah,
it's hard to sort of disagree with you there. I think it'll be a little bit higher. Once again, I think it'll be around about the 38, 39. So I think about 6 goals. But I think the Western Bulldogs will certainly have moments in the game where they'll test Fremantle, and as you said, it'll just be a matter of just seeing how Fremantle utilise or go against this sort of game style. And I'll be really interested to see how they use that ball, bringing the ball out of 50 against a side who does tend to run the ball. And as I said, they and see whether they can get them on the rebound as well. All right, anything else you want to bring up, Seppo, before we finish up for this week?
No, that's pretty much it for this week.
Yep. Just a reminder as well, if you haven't seen on the thread, guys, that we're doing a bit of an interview next week with Kepler Bradley to put on the pod. So if you have any questions or anything you would like to ask, I will certainly do my best to see if we can ask them or get them answered. And hopefully we'll just add a bit more to the pod for next week, Seppo.
Yeah, we're going to be fantastic. Get the one and only Kepler Bradley on to hear his thoughts and hopefully it'll be a good interview.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks again for joining us this week, mate, and we'll catch you again next week.
No worries. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week when we're 7-0.
Yes, it would be nice to keep our run going, particularly up to the bye, and allow the Fremantle side a little bit more, a few more options coming into the second half of the season. That's it for this week. Thanks again for joining us, and once again, if you have any questions for Kepler, please make sure you put them on the board. And if you were interested in coming on board or joining us for a session, please either message myself or Seppo, and we'll be more than happy to have you on board. That's it for this week. We'll catch you again next week. Bye for now.